but it's not anti-Semitic. It never is. For those who don't know, Charlotte Church is a Welsh singer, and today we're gonna be talking about uh, um, this event that has happened, and they were chanting some nice things there. Joining me today is Morgan. Hey, Morgan.
Hey Daniel, how's it going?
It's okay, but I'm a bit exhausted. So before we go, so we have a video. So before we go to watch that video, Morgan, have you heard about Charlotte Church before this? I should mention we talked about her before, so I'll mention also that a little bit later. But have you heard about her before this?
Well, only really in relation to the previous episode we did. I think I had heard her name. I can't name a song of hers or anything like that. The main part of this story that is familiar to me, aside from the general topic she's talking about, is the fact that she said this at Glastonbury, which is the town where I'm from. So maybe, I mean, I'll say more about that later, maybe, but no, I don't know too much about Charlotte Church.
So I don't know much about her either. Also, it's mainly from this topic. So I'll just mention. So last time we talked about that is because it was a similar thing. There was an event where she was chanting from the river to the sea, and she was accused of being anti-Semitic, and she was sort of like trying to push back against that she's not actually anti-Semitic. So I think a bit later we can talk about the chant from the river to the sea, and we'll also talk about the chant that will come here. So let's go to the video. I think I have it here. All right, let's watch this.
We march together. We march together. Stop the occupation. Yes, I know. 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 Yes, of freedom, of freedom, of freedom, freedom is coming.
So the first thing that always comes to mind is I hate how catchy these sort of like songs are, and I have a similar view of like when I used to go to church. I went to Catholic church, and we used to, you sing songs there. And they're like always like they're kind of nice. I always like to sing, but they're once you start hearing about the words, they're completely horrible once you know the context. So it's always something that yeah is really interesting. So they were giving out the classic quotes, "Stop the occupation." I don't think "Free Palestine" is mentioned here specifically, but during this event also "Free Palestine" or "Free Palestine" has been chanted many times. So Morgan, what are your first thoughts from hearing the video?
Well, that it seems to be taking place, as you say, in a kind of church room somewhere. And it's this paltry kind of little event that happens all over the country, I'm afraid. Just that the kind of people who seem to be involved with this, and my impression from Charlotte Church of seeing her talk last time about this and from seeing her talk this time about this and the kind of comments that she's made, is just that she's a kind of probably like a lot of people in that room, just quite sentimental, has picked up the general representation of, Palestine and the Palestinian cause, which goes about in the media and more broadly in the culture. That, as they say, this is a fight for freedom, this is a fight for equality, this is a fight for justice. When, we would very strongly disagree and say it's nothing of the sort. And, we can get into more dissected specific reasons why it's nothing like that. But I think a lot of these people are basically just second-handers who have heard something said and haven't particularly critically examined it, and therefore are just going along with the crowd. It feels good, it sounds kind of nice, they've got their jaunty little song, and so they're going along and saying these things which are actually in reality awful. They're supporting an awful cause. They just probably don't realize it.
Yeah, I mean, it is something. I mean, we've been talking about this war for many months now, and this sort of both ignorance, but also automatic sort of just going along with it is something we've seen before. My favorite example of this was that I think it was at Columbia University when someone asked her, okay, why you're here? And she just had a perfect response. I'm not really sure why we're here. And there was a random person, so she was, do you know why we're here? And she also didn't know. And that's, it almost feels like a psyop, like fabricated. Someone just made it to basically make me hate the other side even more because it's just so like it's just so weird. And yeah, it's similar here. They chant. I mean, when do you take the phrases "Stop the occupation," or "Free Palestine" by itself? Obviously uh they sound nice. They don't seem as anything bad, but and I think that was the case that Charlotte Church was making for basically not being anti-Semitic. Is I just want a free state. I think even when she was asked about this, or when I think one of her either co-singers or someone who participated in the event with her said like, yeah, we want the ceasefire, but we also want to release all the hostages. So it's this sort of like complete, yeah, not understanding of this what's the actual situation and just looking at it like so directly, so like pinpoint at like one area. um, so what do you think about this?
Well, I was just going to say, I think maybe that video is that from another event that she's done, because I think the ones that have spurred the articles today, as I say, are from Glastonbury Festival, and those events are taking place in a tent. So, and I think the video we just watched seemed like it was in a church somewhere, as we were saying. So maybe it's something else that she's done. But so I mean, I'll give some people some context on Glastonbury then. As I say, it's the town I grew up in, and which I am very fond of, but it's got some mixed elements, let's say. So for people who are from the US and maybe don't know Glastonbury, Glastonbury is kind of like Britain's equivalent of Woodstock. So obviously there's the big Woodstock Festival back in the Summer of Love in 1968, something like that, 67, whenever that was. And it's this big hippie festival. Rand has something to say about it actually in an essay called Apollo and Dionysus. Now, Glastonbury doesn't happen quite at that time. I think the first Glastonbury festival was in the early 70s, founded by a guy called Michael Eavis, who's still around, who's a young farmer, kind of hippie-ish guy, a little bit, who loves 70s music and basically sets up his own music festival. And the first year, they get something like 500 people who come along, and then the next ones get thousands. And now it's something like 200,000 people, probably more now, who pop up onto the floodplains about a mile or two from my house, probably 2 or 3 miles actually, that I grew up in every year. And it's this huge festival. It's kind of moved away from its original roots in the sense of a kind of a small ragtag kind of thing. Now it's a hugely expensive corporate kind of thing. Lots of people go. As I say, it's enormously expensive, and but where it hasn't moved away from its roots is that there's still a lot of kind of left-wing politics there. So a few years ago, when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, he decided to go there and make a speech, read out his kind of slogan of "for the many, not the few." Actually, referring back, he read out the poem it was originally from, which is by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Unfortunately, I love that poem, but unfortunately, Corbyn decided to adopt it. And also, the Dalai Lama went there one year and said some silly message about peace and love, whatever, right? So this kind of politics goes around at the Glastonbury Festival all the time. It's kind of in the history and the culture of it. And my understanding is that Charlotte Church was at one of the kind of smaller stages with Billy Bragg, who's this socialist campaigner from the 80s, who sings songs. And she sung a song which ends in, from the river to the sea, free Palestine, something like that. And, I think there's some general stuff to say about why people are taken in by this, who I think probably aren't anti-Semitic in their intentions. I'd be surprised if Charlotte Church really is, but who end up supporting things which are anti-Semitic and which would call for the elimination of Jews in the Middle East, basically, certainly between the river and the sea that are being mentioned. I think that's where the real kind of cash value is here. And, Glastonbury itself, we will expect to always be silly and hippie-ish along these lines.
Yeah, so I've been trying to check. Yeah, I think the video we played is from a different event. So sorry for that. I don't think we have a video from the Glastonbury. So we're gonna be more just talking about it.
That would be
Uh,
enormously copyrighted, probably, because they charge a fortune to watch those things.
yeah, I can imagine. So yeah, I mean, let's discuss the actual quotes because I'm not sure if we ever actually discussed them directly. Uh, so maybe we can start with the "From the river to the sea." So the full quote is "From the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free," or "Palestine will be free." There are many different versions. and and it's similar to the sort of idea of free Palestine. We just want a free nation. We just want Palestinians to be free. But the question there is always, well, one, never ask them, to actually name the river and the sea. They might have a problem with that. But even if they knew, uh, they try to imply it's just the idea that there should be a Palestinian state, or that it should be it's advocating for a two-state solution. But what does it mean? I mean, from the river to the sea, that's all of Israel. That's not just it doesn't suddenly stop at the West Bank and Gaza. It's all of Israel. So whenever you hear that quote, whatever the actual ideas of the person saying them, the actual purpose of the quote and the origins of the quote is to advocate for eradication of the state of Israel, and in many cases, eradication of the Jews in the area totally. Uh, so yeah, the idea that I'm not, or the person is not anti-Semitic who repeats that quote, and someone who just blindly repeats it might specifically not be anti-Semitic, might just be ignorant. But if there is a quote that you're chanting, if there is something you support, you should know the origins, and you should know it does have anti-Semitic origins, which I don't think have changed. It's still an anti-Semitic quote.
Yeah, it's a tremendous how would you put it, moral irresponsibility of someone to go around and chant a political slogan without really having thought it through and without really understanding what the implications are. And so when Charlotte Church initially got in some hot water, I think it was back in February or something like that.
Yeah.
When she initially got into some hot water about this, she said, "I'm not anti-Semitic," and various kind of groups came out and said this chant isn't anti-Semitic. And they said it's just a chant that's in favor of liberty, equality, justice for people in Palestine. However, so that if that were to be plausible, I think what the people who are chanting it would have to be in favor of is basically the following. They'd have to be they would have to be in favor of the destruction of Hamas, the destruction of Fatah, and the end of the conflict, i.e., the end of violence with Israel, the end of any armed resistance, the end of any armed uprising, anything like that. So it'd have to be in opposition to things like October 7th and the continuation of any of it. The idea that people have ownership of the land because they're the Palestinian people own all the land or something like that. They'd have to be anti these things. They'd also have to be against the Palestinian, was it the People's Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, all these groups. Now, I don't know what Charlotte Church is in favor of in terms of these groups. I suspect, again, it's probably rather shallow, her support. But the people more broadly who are chanting this, they don't seem to feel the need to say, I am against all this. I completely separate myself from it. And certainly the people in the region who might be chanting something like that, they aren't against those people. They might be against one or two of those groups for factional reasons, but ideologically, they're aligned. They're in favor of the continued violence and the continuation of the conflict. And so when people in the West, like Charlotte Church, or like any of the countless other thousands, or probably millions really, who go around chanting this, they're chanting, not only just for the eradication of Jews in the region, but they're chanting a chant from the groups that want to enact such a thing. And it is just inexcusable to be going around and doing that and to say that what you're in favor of is liberty, justice, and equality, whatever. Because what do those terms even mean then? Because none of these groups want to set up a state which actually has any objective understanding of those ideas. The people who would exist in this Palestinian state from between the river and the sea would not be free in any meaningful understanding of that term. There would not be justice. There would be some miserable little dictatorship, and there would not be equality in the sense of equality before the law. There might be equality of misery, perhaps, but nothing, again, meaningful about the term equality. So this is all just a nonsense, which I think is carried along by emotionalism, by sentimentality, by people not really thinking for themselves. I think these kind of chants really show that why it's crucial that you need to think critically and for yourself about what comes out in the media, because otherwise you'll end up like a droning moron, like any of these people.
Yeah, I think there are two problems when it comes to people like Charlotte Church, but let's talk more broadly about and they're making their opinions about Palestine or specifically about this conflict, or even just advocating, we just want ceasefire, we just want the violence to stop. Well, one, and let's say when they even advocate for the free state of Palestine, or from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, this sort of like a state. One, there is a certain amount of, and I'm wondering what's the actual root of it, because it might be actual, maybe not necessarily benevolent root, but the sort of Western liberal sort of view of the world that we believe, just if there is a democracy, if people will have a right to choose, if they are not living under oppressive regime, everything will be good. They'll have a choice and they'll elect good, because we've all pretty much lived our whole lives in a Western world, in a world that have fair elections, in a world that have free speech, in a world where you can pretty much freely express your ideas. And so when they try to apply the same thing, they cannot. I think many people cannot imagine that if Palestinians were giving a free state or were giving an election, which is something that has happened, they don't believe they would elect Hamas. They do believe if they were given an actual state, fully sovereign state, let's say in all of West Bank and all of Gaza, they do believe this conflict would end. It would no longer be a problem. They really don't see, and that brings me to the second point, the lack of context, is they really do not have the actual knowledge to look at the conflict. I mean, I wouldn't expect, I wouldn't expect everyone to know about the Israeli. I mean, it's probably when it comes to the sort of general view, it is viewed as one of the most complicated topics in geopolitics. So I wouldn't expect just an average person or even a singer or a famous person to know everything about this. But when you don't talk about it, don't make opinions about it when when you think it's a complicated topic. And again, because they view it in such a simple way of, well, people are dying, so let's just stop this, and completely forgetting that stopping this means that Hamas will persevere and there will be more October 7th in this area.
Yes, when she was kind of, put on the spot last time in February about this, she said that if you know the history, then you know that this isn't an anti-Semitic chant. So she's laid her claim on not being anti-Semitic on the fact that she does know the history, apparently. Now I have no idea.
Doesn't?
No, that she does. Sorry, that she does know the history. Excuse me if I misspoke. So she's actually claiming she has, gone and done all the reading, I guess. I feel dubious about that. I suspect she's read some things, in the Guardian online somewhere. Maybe she's spoken with friends.
I mean, maybe she read Finkelstein. I mean, that's pretty much all on
true.
the same level.
She could have done. I mean, and that's the unfortunate thing about the conflict, is that there are almost two different histories. Now that there isn't in actuality two histories, but one of the books I was reading recently is by I'm trying to get his name right. I think it's Rashid Khalidi. Called The 100 Years' War on Palestine. And if you were to read that, and that was to be your understanding of the conflict, you would come out with a really bad view of it. And so, yeah, it's understandable that if you just read some of the more anti-Israel publications, like let's say The Guardian in the UK, or if you read Al Jazeera, which is unfortunately popular amongst some people. I've met people who you wouldn't think of as being left-wing, and yet the only news source they read is Al Jazeera, bizarrely, because they think it's unbiased. If this was what you were reading, you would come out with a really anti-Israel perspective. But it's inexcusable for you to be that isolated deliberately kind of narrow and blinkered in the information you're taking in. And again, this should be instructive for people about the kind of way that you should act in terms of educating yourself, not only just broadly in history, but in terms of the news that you're taking in as well.
And yeah, I mean, just to finish or to continue with more quotes. So so we talked about the from the river to the sea. Then the other one is the sort of that was chanted recently by Charlotte Church. It's Free Palestine, which in a sense could be a bit better, but again, it's a similar problem advocating for free Palestine. One, it's such a broad statement, and like, what does it mean really? Does it mean free as in independent, completely separated from Israel, or in a sense uh, uh, completely its own thing? But again, there is this sort of like complete lack of what's the actuality on the ground, and it reduces all of it into a free chant. And even when you have something like Free Palestine, well, for one, freedom is one of the most uh, in a sense, adaptable concept pretty much ever. Everyone advocates for freedom. Communists advocate for freedom, Nazis advocate for freedom, and pretty much everyone advocates for freedom. And even so when you even search Free Palestine, because before the show, I wanted to search up all of these quotes to learn a bit more about them. And there is little to find about this specifically Free Palestine, but there are many movements called that. There is one that is completely dedicated to the eradication of Israel, and they use the slogan for that. They used the use of the slogan. They used the slogan "Free Palestine" as to basically justify the eradication of Israel. But you could even try terms such as liberation, and you have the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, a terrorist group. You have the Palestinian Liberation Front, another terrorist group. So we have these, you have these terms again, which in the Western world they are viewed positively: freedom, liberation. What's the last one? Liberty. But those again, with if you don't have context, those will be used by the terrorists to again advocate for the eradication of Israel. And by you using them, you are indirectly supporting that.
Yeah, it's the word freedom is such a watered down cliche, not not in actuality, but in the way that people are really using it. That I think if you say that you're in favor of freedom or of the freedom of a people, you need to denote what exactly you mean by that. Now, I understand that if you're at a rally and you're making chants, you haven't got space to put a little asterisk and say, we mean it in this way. But broadly, the people in a movement who are making these kind of chants should articulate what they mean by that. And they try to sometimes, but they'll just give another kind of vague description about the people of Palestine being free from their Israeli occupiers or something like that. But what they don't mean by freedom.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Just to quickly jump in, because even the idea of, and it was mentioned, the sort of stop the occupation. And when people refer to, being liberated from the Jewish occupiers, whenever people say, this was one of the hardest thing whenever I read an article, when people say occupied territories. Because depending on the ideology of the person, occupied territory could mean Gaza, it could mean the area C in the West Bank, it could mean all of West Bank, and it could mean all of Israel, because some people consider all of Israel an occupied territory. So even something like that goes all over the place based on the ideology of the person talking. Sorry, I jump in.
No, that's okay. No, but you're right, and people do. That is something that goes on, but the freedom that people are talking about here, they do not mean freedom of speech, the right to private property, the right to a fair trial, all of these kind of things. The basic Western liberal conceptions of freedom that have emerged since the Enlightenment. They don't mean anything like that. And so then you have to wonder, what exactly do they mean? And probably a lot of the time they don't really know. And what they just mean is some kind of self-determination for a Palestinian state. And yet, at the worst, at the anti-Semitic worst, what the people in this movement mean, as you say, is the eradication of the state of Israel. And that's really what the logic of the chant is getting at. That's really where the origin of the chant is. And that's why it's so inexcusable to be going around doing it. And, we're picking on Charlotte Church because she's in the news, but she's representative of millions, really, of other people in the West who are as silly and empty-headed as this, to going around making a political chant about something which I suspect they don't really understand. Maybe I'm giving her too much credit, but I suspect she doesn't really have a clue.
Well, her not having a clue would be to her benefit, since if she actually knows the history, it's so much more inexcusable, advocating for these ideas or even repeating these terms. So let me quickly thank Jonathan for his super sticker. Also, thank you, Bonnie, for your super sticker. And thank you, Gigi Ryder, for your super chat, who says, liberation has a dictionary meaning from tyranny and a parallel Marxist meaning, liberation from normal Western liberal Enlightenment civilization. As we said, freedom has a meaning. All words have a meaning, but the way they have been used, and maybe you are right in this case, similarly, liberation has a proper meaning, but also has been kidnapped by these sort of Marxist organization. Whenever you have Arabic or Palestinian organization, it's either Marxist or it's Islamic or it's both. Morgan, anything to say before we part our ways?
No, nothing else, especially just again that all of the conflict is so contentious and so sort of ideologically fractious that for people who are a bit credulous when they read the news, this should really be a wake-up call for you, that you have to think for yourself. I've met people, unbelievably, who think that you can just take the opinion of people who are informed, quote unquote, for themselves and not really have to think for themselves. I've literally heard people say that, and it's unbelievable to hear people say that. It seems like something which people could not actually believe, and yet there are people who do that. And of course, the people who are informed in this case are just people who they arbitrarily assume are an authority. But everyone has to think for themselves. You can't get around that. That's something that Rand stresses very, very much. And so when it comes to the conflict, you can't just hear, oh, we're in favor of freedom for Palestine, assume that means that they really are in favor of any meaningful conception of freedom, and therefore go around chanting a political slogan. Otherwise, you'll end up like these people. So this should just make it really plain to you the necessity of being first-handed and thinking for yourself.
And with that, I hope we brought some clarity to this topic. Thank you, Morgan, for joining me today. In just a couple of minutes, there is the reality show Extra, which is for the YouTube live stream is for YouTube members only, and our regular members can join the Zoom call directly. We will be talking about, will the Conservative Party go extinct? So the elections are coming up. The elections in United Kingdom are coming up, are just around the corner, just in 4 days. So we'll be talking about it just a little bit today, and probably a bit more in the upcoming week. So make sure to tune in just a couple of minutes, and we'll see you there. But we'll also see you tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and the reality show. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.